Have you ever found yourself in a situation where a message seemed to pass through several people, instead of traveling directly between the two who actually needed to talk? Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to settle in with me today. I want to reassure you right from the start that our conversation today isn't about blaming anyone, pointing fingers, or analyzing people's deeper flaws. Instead, we are just spending some quiet time understanding the gentle, sometimes tangled patterns of how we communicate with each other. There is an interesting idea we can explore together, a curiosity loop suggesting that some of our deepest misunderstandings are shaped not necessarily by what is actually said, but by how that information travels from one person to another. Sometimes people use a term called triangulation to describe situations where communication flows indirectly between people, creating misunderstandings or a sense of distance. We are not using this word to label anyone or to spot hidden agendas. Rather, it is just a way to observe a dynamic where a third person is brought into a conversation that really belonged to just two. It can sometimes appear in very everyday moments, without any malice or bad intentions involved. Imagine a normal day at a workplace, where someone feels a bit overwhelmed by a project shared with a coworker. But instead of talking to that coworker directly, they express their frustration to a different colleague. The third colleague, wanting to be helpful and supportive, might then try to bridge the gap by passing the message along. This is where confusion starts to grow, because humans are naturally empathetic and emotional. The person carrying the message rarely delivers it exactly as it was originally spoken. They might soften it to protect feelings. They might summarize it for the sake of time, or they might unconsciously add their own interpretation to the words based on their own experiences. What started as a simple request for a bit more clarity or help on a project might suddenly sound like a major complaint about someone's work ethic, simply because the message had to cross through an extra layer of human interpretation. People occasionally notice this same pattern unfolding in friendship circles or family dynamics, where two people who are lightly disagreeing end up communicating almost entirely through a mutual friend or a relative. The mutual friend might genuinely want to keep the peace, stepping in as an intermediary to help everyone understand each other better. Here's what people often overlook. When we rely on someone else to carry our thoughts, we are asking them to also carry our tone, our context, and our intentions, which is a nearly impossible task for anyone to do perfectly. The mutual friend, feeling caught in the middle and wanting to avoid making things worse, might try to balance the feelings of both sides, leading to softened truths or vague explanations that leave both original parties feeling even more confused or unheard. It is very common for tension to arise in these moments, without any clear intention from anyone to cause trouble. Everyone involved might be trying their absolute best to navigate the situation gracefully. Yet the indirect nature of the communication itself creates a fog where clarity should be. When we start looking at indirect communication as a shared human dynamic, rather than a personal failing, it becomes much easier to step back and gently untangle the threads without feeling defensive. We might notice that a lot of our interactions in these scenarios rely heavily on assumptions and interpretations, rather than direct questions and answers. If we hear that a friend is upset with us through another friend, our first instinct might be to feel hurt or defensive, based entirely on how the messenger delivered the news, rather than the reality of the situation. This is the part that's easy to misunderstand. We might react to the interpretation of the event rather than the event itself, forgetting that the message we received has been filtered through someone else's perspective, their mood at that specific time, and their own unique relationship with the person who originally spoke. Certain situations involve people naturally gravitating toward a third party, because direct conflict or direct expressions of a need can feel quite vulnerable or intimidating. It is completely human and incredibly common to seek comfort or validation from someone safe before addressing a difficult issue with the person it actually concerns. We all need sounding boards sometimes to process our feelings out loud. The challenge only really emerges when the comforting third party becomes a permanent messenger, replacing the direct conversation entirely, and inadvertently keeping the original two people from truly connecting and resolving their differences. When we recognize this happening in our own lives, whether we are the ones sending the indirect message, the ones receiving it, or the ones stuck in the middle carrying it, we don't need to panic or assume the worst about anyone's motives. We can simply observe it quietly. We can say to ourselves, it seems like the communication here is a bit indirect right now, and maybe that is why things feel a little tense or unclear. This gentle awareness allows us to softly pivot the dynamic without making a grand announcement. If you find yourself repeatedly holding a message meant for someone else, you can warmly encourage the people involved to speak to each other, perhaps offering to support them from the sidelines rather than acting as a translator. Notice how subtle this shift can be. You are not refusing to care about your friends or colleagues. You are simply returning the conversation to where it naturally belongs, allowing them the space to understand each other fully. If, on the other hand, you feel that someone is speaking to you through another person, you can lightly step out of the fog by reaching out directly to the source. A simple calm check-in, such as asking if everything is okay, or mentioning that you wanted to touch base directly to make sure nothing was misunderstood, can often instantly dissolve the tension that was building up in the indirect space. The beautiful thing about shifting away from indirect communication is that it naturally invites more clarity, honesty, and connection into our daily lives. Direct communication does not have to be harsh, confrontational, or scary. In fact, when done with care, patience, and an open heart, it is one of the kindest things we can do for our relationships. It removes the exhausting guesswork. It honors the other person enough to speak to them face to face. And it prevents the natural drift that happens when words are carried on the wind of a third party. Moving forward, as we navigate our varied relationships, at work, at home, and in our social lives, we can hold onto the quiet understanding that the path a message takes is often just as important as the message itself. By choosing the direct path whenever possible, and by gently refusing to become the permanent bridge for other people's unspoken words, we create an environment where trust can quietly flourish, and where people feel genuinely seen and heard. Better communication often reduces confusion, replacing the tangled webs of hearsay with the solid, peaceful ground of mutual understanding. If this reflection resonated with you, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for being here.